And now, without further ado, I want to hand it off to our guest speaker for today, Michael Papanek. I said that correctly, right?
Papanek, yep.
Papanek. Yes, and he is going to lead us into discussion about how to lead resilient teams. And so, Michael, the floor is yours.
Well, I expect a fanfare. Anyway, thank you, everybody. I'm honored that you chose to spend some time today. We're going to keep this pretty fast-paced, pretty dense, but highly interactive. And so, my question, I'll leave it rhetorical. Why isn't every team you're on like that team you talked about? That's what I want to know. So, in my experience, I could relate as I listened to everybody to a lot of things people were saying. And so there's a lot of aspects of teamwork that I really love. So just to answer Kalinda's question. So I'm going to talk about a team that I was on that is a theatrical team. I'm actually a lighting designer. I do theatrical lighting, Jason. And so I love the actors, the script writers, the musicians, the set designers, the sound, on and on, the costumes, bringing it all together, the excitement of showing it to people. And I would love making a director's vision come true as best as I can. And that's a big turn on. And I think I also relate to kind of this supportive idea of I've got your back. So I also sail. I like a lot of group activities, I guess, or I turn them into group activities. So as a sailor, I've been sailing for many years with some people that I've known a really long time. And I won't share the story, but the other day something broke, as things like to do on a sailboat. And they usually like to break at the worst possible moment. That seems to be how they're designed. And without a word, every one of us did what needed to be done in that moment. And that also came to mind as you were all talking about sort of the, like when Stacey was saying, kind of, I'll paraphrase what you said, what I think you said, Stacey, you didn't have to ask. People came in and we just helped each other mostly. And if you did ask, you certainly got help. But you knew that people cared about each other at the same time. Back to theater, I like to think that innovation, which is a big part of the team focus that I work on is innovation teams, I think of it as corporate improv. So I have always loved improv. And, I'm okay at it, like a lot of amateurs. But you learn some principles at improv that might apply to teams. Like they have a little exercise we did with an improv group. And all you do, this is an in-person physical group of people in a room. We would walk around simply saying, I've got your back. So I'd say to Paul, got your back? He said, no, man, I got your back. And then Jessica would say, well, I got your back, right? Some of the other little exercises, we had one where we just told each other, you were the best improviser in the world. No, you're the best improviser in the world. So it's this idea of support. And so we're going to get way into, frankly, everything that you all just mentioned. One of the ideas is the container that team has, how much it's able to handle conflict or difficulty and get through it. So I thought of that a little bit when I was also listening to Haley and Paul talk about the teams that they, that ability to kind of bring up anything and discuss things and remain comrades and friends and colleagues and respect each other. That's the sweet spot. And that's kind of been the tough, the other question, which we don't do right now, but it's always a fun question. Tell me about your worst team. What makes them horrible? Everybody has worst team experiences, right? There's an old saying, hell is other people, I think, and so it can be very tough. And myself, there's that old joke. Why does a consultant study a certain thing? Because they've had their own trouble with it, right? So I've had a life where teamwork was very interesting to me for both these feelings. That incredible joy of being on that team, where again, we think about it, if you're lucky, you're on that team once in your life. If you're really lucky, you're on that team all the time. And so I work with leaders and teams that want to reach that spot. And there's a bunch of ways you do that. Okay, so does all that makes sense? All right, so you're in the right place. That's what we're going to talk about. So we'll get into it here. So let's see. So I can share my screen. I can go to Microsoft PowerPoint. I can make it a presentation. And so I assume everybody is seeing. Um,
Oh, we're not seeing the presentation mode.
oh,
We
it
saw it for a
changed.
second.
There it
There
goes.
we go.
All right, very good. Sorry about that. All right, and my microphone is good and everybody's good. So there they are. I like to call this the shiny happy people slide because that's their kind of shiny happy people. Looks like maybe Stacy dropped off. Hopefully she'll be able to come back. So when you hear the word unbreakable team, just give us in chat. What do you think that means? Just something in chat. When I say unbreakable team, what comes to mind? Malleable, interesting. Yep. Agile. I guess everybody can see these. I don't have to. Can handle. Oh, Stacy's able to text. There she is. Can handle barriers. Responsive. Adversity doesn't kill the connection. Boy, I'm going to have you guys teach this workshop in a million. Resilient. That's right. So when you think about these attributes, if you were going to make a business case to somebody and say, you know, it's worth having this idea of an unbreakable team, what would be something you'd share with them where you say, what's the ROI? So again, in chat, what's the ROI of this kind of resilient, malleable, responsive, et cetera? What's the benefit? You got to think about that one for a minute. Goals are met, productivity straight up, better innovation. Yep, exactly. And again, the right people want to stay. Yeah, the higher value output, that output per employee, even you might think about it, and then more creativity. That's right. And I'm going to add some words that you used a minute ago that nobody put in here. The ROI, I think you probably thought, you know, business ROI, but certainly joy and joy and inclusion and things that, you know, are ROI in a certain way. And seem to have become more important during the pandemic. So the other thing that I think has happened is I started working on this a long time ago, published my book about it in 2017. And, you know, certainly more people are interested in it than used to be for obvious reasons. All right. So what are we going to do here? And I'm going to just take my watch off because I do like to manage time. So we're going to talk about me and my book. No, we're going to talk about what is this idea, the last one I just asked you about, you know, business metrics and team relationships. I'm going to introduce, I think, an idea called social resilience, which you probably can already start to think about. What does that mean? I want to be able to help us all go deeper and to understand, well, what are the attributes of those fantastic teams we talked about, these unbreakable teams? In my mind, they're really one way to sort it. There are two kinds of teams, and I've been on both. And I've been on the team that when there's difficulty or stress or change, even new opportunities, some of those teams start to pull apart. And then other teams under the same type of conditions will pull together. And I think, you know, we need a lot of pulling together these days. And so I think that that's what I'm curious and interested in. And I'm certainly share that with you, and you can share. And then some awareness of some new tools and ideas and strategies that hopefully will give you some new ways of thinking. And as you know, if you want different results, you're going to have different behavior. If you want different behavior, what's driving your behavior? Your thinking, hopefully. So if we're going to really, especially any kind of transformative result, any kind of really big, again, what I call breakthrough, to get out of breakdown, that's going to require new thinking. And so we're going to be very practical, but I invite you to, you know, be sort of participate in that. And if we've achieved my vision for this little afternoon, you'll be inspired to do something a little different, take a follow-up action. So that's what we're up to. So tell you a little bit kind of about me, and it's very nice to meet everybody. I don't think any of us have been in any ATD meetings before. I've met Kalinga, obviously, and everybody. So there's a picture of me with a lot less gray hair. And I'm a young man there, and you know, pretty many decades ago at this point. And I'm thinking in the thinking spot. I just think it's a cute sign. And what am I thinking about? So in the 1980s, I'll go ahead and reveal how long ago this was. I worked for a company called EDS. Raise your hand if you ever heard of EDS. Okay, I might as well said raise your hand if you're an old timer. Okay, and I would have gotten the same hands. EDS is a company that was founded by a fellow named Ross Perot. So I don't know if anybody knows who Ross Perot was. I'm getting a few more nods. Even the youngsters like Jason know who Ross Perot was. And so he was this guy, it's up on my shelf, who wrote it. There was a book by Ken Follett called The Wings of Eagles. And it was all about how this company went and rescued one of their employees during a very difficult time overseas. And I was quite taken by this as a young fellow. And I thought, wow, what an inspiring group, right? So again, when you talked about your best team, meaning was a big part of the team, in my opinion. Shared meaning, especially, right? But the meaningfulness of jazz, the meaningfulness of all the things you've done. So I thought that's quite meaningful. It's very interesting. There was also this thing starting to happen called computers and IT in the 1980s. And I thought that there might be a future in that. And so I left my lovely kind of enjoyable hippie experience in California, and I went and got a serious job at EDS, and we were just acquired by General Motors, which is why they hired us. And so I went and worked with General Motors, and I want to be a programmer. I became a systems engineer. I was there almost 10 years. And I started to notice something. We would get the technology just right, and we sometimes still wouldn't get a renewal from the client. I was like, well, how is this happening? We have to. I was designing finance systems that did healthcare, like for Blue Shield or General Motors, and I would find that sometimes and the problem was I couldn't. So that's what I'm thinking about in the picture. I'm suggesting, pretending that I'm thinking about why did we do everything so and so. So we used to have a little version, and even you don't have to be in IT to know what I'm talking about. There was a version of this, the old Christmas poem, A Night Before Christmas, and all through the house, not a creature was stirring. We all know this poem. Yeah, nod if you know this poem. There, you're nodding. I've engaged you. Anyway, so we had an IT version, the users are dreaming of reports or blah, blah, blah. And the end of the poem went like this. The users exclaimed with a jeer and a taunt, "It's just what I asked for, but it's not what I want." And if you can relate to this, Jason's nodding his head. Again, we haven't talked very much about what people do or the clients they have or the organization you're part of, but it's not just an IT phenomenon. This happens in product development and a million things. Education, all over the place, we have this sort of breakdown. And what I didn't know then, but that I started to learn and understand much more deeply, was that it was our relationships that were really driving that thumbs up, thumbs down when it was time to renew the contract. When somebody was staying or going, when I had challenges, even technology challenges, I sort of learned that phrase, if you scratch a technology problem, you'll find a people problem. And so I started to really notice how the culture of our teams and the way that we related to each other started to really impact our outcomes. And I became more and more interested in what I thought was the trickiest, most interesting, and most important dynamic, which was the team dynamic. So that's where I started to do the work that I do. I left EDS in 92, and I joined a company that focused on leadership and collaboration, change management, meeting facilitation. I became a partner there, working mostly in Silicon Valley, but luckily with clients all over the world in many different industries. I mostly do tech or tech related, but everything under the sun, really. And then in 2008, at a kind of a crazy time, if you were there in 2008, it was a little bit of a crazy time. We thought it was crazy. We didn't have any idea what crazy really was. But anyway, I went on my own, started Michael Papanek Consulting, and then have grown that organization. So that's kind of my journey. So when I think of what's most important, individual resilience is very important. and there's a lot of research about this. It's kind of trendy. If you go to Google search words or anything, you're just going to see a ton of stuff on the idea of resilience or individual resilience. Now, what is resilience? So resilience is usually defined a number of different ways, but the best metaphor is the bridge that twists but doesn't break, right? And you may have seen these videos, and there's basically a bunch of these videos, and they end one of two ways. Either the bridge twists because of the wind or the earthquake or the storm, and then it settles, and cars can safely, or people can safely pass over it again, or it breaks to the point where it goes into total breakdown, completely collapses, and hopefully nobody's hurt. So what do you think, and take yourself off mute, what do you think is the difference between the two bridges? The ones that stay up, what makes one resilient when the other isn't? It's an engineering question.
The links between the parts.
The links between the parts. So something about those links. That's right. What else might you say?
One is built to adapt to the environments that are expected. The other is built to resist it at all costs.
Very well put. Exactly right. So if an engineer was going to define flexibility, they'd say pretty much what you just said, strong but flexible. The palm tree, not the oak tree. The oak tree is strong, but not flexible, built to withstand, as Paul said, right? So the whole idea of resilience is strong plus flexible. And so your individual resilience has to do with how strong or flexible you are under stress or challenge or difficulty. When we talk about social resilience, Jessica, we're talking about the links. See, to me, talking about individual resilience is like talking about one steel beam in the bridge. Who cares if it's at the bottom of the lake and it's not broken? It's the system that has to stay together. It's the team. If there's 5 of us in a room that are a team, there's a 6th entity in the room, the team. And so for me, it's the ability for us to hang together, as I said, rather than pulling apart, to collaborate, to co-labor, to labor with each other. That's what really pushes it. So individual resilience is that bounce back ability, right? And social resilience is the ability of any system, organization, or group of people to perform and function during stress, change, and challenge. So when I say perform or function, I mean they're still able to achieve their essential outcome. Often I think of the resilience of a family. So the group, there are many groups in the world. I mean, and so what about the family group? So if you know about teams, you know that a team is not defined by what makes us similar. If we're all salespeople or we're all runners in the same race, we're not a team, even though we're quite similar. We're a team only if we share our fate. Only if we have interdependence of fate are we actually a team, right? And so it's that connection of us being able to achieve whatever it is our outcome. So if a family goes through economic hardship, physical hardship, disease, safety, how can they pull together and still do what families are supposed to do to protect and nurture and love each other and be a family together? That's what we're talking about. So when I think of this, I think of the unit that we're kind of focused on. So another little hand raise. Have you ever taken a test that kind of types your personality? You're a 7 on the Enneagram. You're an INTJ, et cetera, right? You're a D on the disc or whatever you might be, right? And so those are helpful to type myself and to understand myself, especially, some are more scientific, some do a bunch of stuff. But what I want to type is not the thing called Michael. I want to type the thing called Michael, Jessica, Paul, Kalinga, Yolanda, Jason, Stacy. That thing is what I'm interested in, right? So just to simplify it, Kalinga and I are just getting to know each other. So we have a relationship. We could guess at how resilient is our relationship, right? And then over the time, we could have a more or less relationship. So I'm going to share this model with you, and I want you to think about a relationship that you actually have in business right now that is even, or in your life, I would say, certainly. I'm a business, this isn't about marriage or whatever. But think of a business relationship that's either very important to go well, you and your manager, you and a direct report, you and a customer, or one that you already know isn't going very well. And I'm going to share this model with you a little bit, and that's a good way that we use frameworks. How do we use a model or a framework? To evaluate, to test, to plan, to take action. So resilient business relationships, as we said, they're strong and they're flexible, but because we're human beings, my research and experience found that we needed a third attribute for resilience in human attributes, and that's fairness. Okay, so I'm going to define these very quickly. Then I'm going to ask you to talk about, well, in the relationship I'm thinking about, we're high on this attribute, maybe lower on that attribute, and ask you to try to evaluate or assess just one relationship at this point, because again, that's a little team of two. So strong is what, again, a lot of your comments reflected. Strong is the value created from the relationship. So how important is that value? Would it be easy to have that value met some other way? Or would it be hard to replace that value without this relationship? Is there synergy? I like to say the best relationships in teams, 1 + 1 = 3. Right? So a strong relationship that's resilient is actually synergistic. We create more than we could. I got to say, Kalinga, when you helped me with that little video to publicize this event, that was 1 + 1 = 3, in my opinion. I don't know if you would agree. But your skills and abilities had a huge gap that I didn't have. I had something that you were looking for. And together we created something that was a little probably better than either one of us done apart. And that's a trivial example. What we're really talking about is some of those things that you talked about, like Jason, when you said theater. That's 1 + 1 = man infinity sometimes. Right? I'm lighting them right. The sound is perfect. The makeup's great. The script is right. Boom, you get all that together and it's 100x. It's not even 1 + 1 = 3, in my opinion. That's what gets me excited. So strong means meaningful as well. So people have different needs. And a lot of people are talking today about the great resignation. Everybody's quitting and changing and moving their jobs. I would suggest, and the research is being done, but I would suggest that most of those people are moving because of a lack of meaningfulness. It's not money. It's the value in relative to the other options. How strong is that employer relationship? What do I get versus what do I, not get? So your relationship has to be strong, or I would call it superficial. Flexible, again, as we talked about, means adaptable. People use the word agile. Is there one way for this team and relationship to work, or can it work in a whole number of ways? Right? So can it change based on conditions? Does it bend without breaking? Like Paul said, and Jessica, I'll combine both your comments, it's made to flex strongly. So it's not actually only built, all those little pieces are built in a way that creates a flexibility. And so again, it can perform its function, its mission in the world, the reason that team or relationship exists, under changing or even especially adverse, stressful conditions. So how flexible are your relationships? Again, in the customer business relationship, we use this framework a lot. I do voice of the customer type work where you evaluate that relationship. And a lot of times customers have complaints either in flexibility or the strongness. And then finally, we had to add fair. And at one point I called this strong, flexible, and equitable, but we ended up with fairness because so many of the leaders I worked with, when they got to the point where people in the organization are saying words like, that's not fair, if you're hearing that in your company, that should be alarm bells going off. That is a lagging indicator. And I've seen people, almost in my opinion, walk away, leave money on the table, as we say, walk away from value, almost cutting their nose to spite their face because of the fairness issue. I work with leaders who have struggled for a very long time, maybe with their partners or other people that they work with, on this fairness issue. So strong, flexible, and fair. So when you think about your own business relationships, what does this bring up for you? How would you think about this framework? How does this play out in your experience? And we'll just ask you to come off mute. Kalinga.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about this past year and how in my organization, I work for a nonprofit. I feel like we were tested across all three of these areas. I think that in my experience, we are very strong. Like we have a strong mission and vision. We focus on affordable housing and getting people off the street. And in the Bay Area, people are like, yes, I'm all for that vision. I think where we have found our weaknesses and where we're working on it is that flexibility, and making sure everybody's being treated fairly throughout the process. And a big component of that is our willingness to take risks. Because as an organization, as a leadership team, what I've found is being risk averse can sometimes hinder that flexibility, because people are like, oh, but the policy, oh, but no one in the industry has done this before. Oh, but how will people think of us? And what we're finding is that, you know what? We shouldn't care how people think of us. If this is aligned with our core values, we have to do what's right. And that's it. Like, period, full stop. And we have, but it definitely was a process. It was definitely a test trial this past year.
And do you think you're stronger than you were before, the same as before, less resilient? What do you think?
I think that we have built resilience. I think we still have some work to do, because we have taken some risks. So for example, with the eviction moratorium, obviously we were keeping, we weren't evicting any of our residents for rent-related reasons, but now the eviction moratorium is lifted. And our execs are like, we're still going to work with our residents. Like, even if residents can't come up with their rent, like, we will take a stance that we're not going to kick them out. We're going to work with them. Let's look up at our financials. Let's see what we need to do. And that's not very common,
no,
unfortunately.
Yeah. And I could guess, and then I want to see if there's other comments.
Yeah.
Your relationship to your organization is stronger because you see them trying to be more fair, trying to be more flexible, right? And so that's what we're talking about. This type of team, that's why I think of them as a quote unbreakable team. What else came up for anybody else who might want to make a comment? And I realize I can't see everybody if I don't.
So as I look at the three and how you describe them, I see a lot of organizations investing time, money, and energy into strong and flexible, but virtually no energy, time, or money into, I don't want to call it codifying, but establishing what fair looks like, particularly within that organization. They allow people to come in and have their own definition of fair and never say, you know what, we need to work this out because I know. And you use the family as an example. And I'm loath to use the family at work because I say, yeah, I've been in a lot of families where everybody protected drunk Uncle Phil. Is that the model you want here? Is that the model you want here?
Yeah, other people. That's not the model. That's right. Yeah.
Right. And they don't spend any time kind of saying, here's what fair looks like. Okay, here's what our fair goal is, or here's what our fair vision is, or something like that. So everybody can work towards our common fair rather than their own definition and need, particularly when you work with cross-functional teams and things like that. So I think for me, that's something I've experienced more than anything else.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying. I mean, there's a lot of things that come up. One, it's the discussion and the agreement that creates the accountability, right? So you could write the perfect policy. If people didn't argue over it, you blew it, Right? It's the debate. It's the give and take. It's the wait a minute. I'll mention this little story that I tell in the book. Years ago, starting, I'd been at my last firm for many years, and we had a new fellow come in, and he was a great guy and a beginner kind of a job, beginner kind of compensation for his role. And at one point, we were discussing, not with this, I didn't know this at the time, but he was talking about, he thought it wasn't very fair, and that what should happen is we should take all the money that we make, you know, after expenses, and just divide that equally among all employees. I see a smile on something. I see curiosity on some faces, laughter on others. But to him, this was fair, right? And so we do have some of this, well, what's equal, what's equitable, what fair is. I said to him, and to, I have to say, he appreciated this, and we came up with some interesting ideas. I said, I've been building this company 20 years. You got here 3 months ago. 20 years from now, do you think it'll be fair if you're earning the same money that you're earning now? Or would you maybe expect to earn a little more by then? We built this thing that you're a part of. Help us build it. And that's a fair return. And he said, yeah, that is a fair return. I mean, he needs to be paid properly and all the rest of it. But this idea that equal does not equal fair. But I also see more and more tension and stress. A lot of people are really worried about their jobs right now. They're obviously, everybody's kind of freaking out. A lot of people have been freaking out. So we've seen a lot of this remote management, nannyware, spyware, bossware. This is the computer. This is a computer watching you on your computer. And so a lot of employees and managers are trying to figure out productivity. If one person does a lot less work in a, processes less claims in a day than everybody else in the team, is that fair? If we notice that and call them on it because of the surveillance software, is that fair? What do we do with that information, right? How do we use that information? So one of the organizations that I'm working with, they try to measure wellness just as much as they measure all those other productivity tools, and they're trying to realize, there's a lot of ways to get this done. So they're trying, but there's a lot of pressure, as you say, and I appreciate the comment. Any other comments anybody wanted to make? Any other thoughts? I'm going to keep us going here. And I know that we're going to kind of go into Q&A here in just a few minutes. So one of the aspects that I think you described, but you may or may not, again, have a framework for, this is kind of the last big idea, I think, for today. We'll show you some of the other comments here in a second, kind of more quickly. So this is the idea of a heat curve. So I'm just going to explain to you what this is and how people use it. And then you'll let me know what you think your heat curve is. So remember we started, I think when we were chatting, I started talking about Minnesota nice or Canada nice. And, I'll just make up the name of a company, ABC Corp. There are cultures where they talk about, well, ABC nice, we're nice over at, whatever, Clorox or AT&T or, whatever company you can think of, we're nice. And that's a nice part of their culture. Well, what's the downside of too much nice in your culture? What would be a downside? Come off mute. Yeah.
So I'm going to point out too, one for me is it often stifles creativity because if the goal is niceness, don't become unnice or whatever. And the second, it can be diverse, but it rarely is inclusive and belonging, because what happens is if you don't assimilate to how we are, you're not valued here. And it can be actually the reason we don't hire people if they won't be as nice as we are.
Right. Our version of nice, our cultural version of nice, all those things. That's right. And Jason, did you have a comment?
I think it just leads to complacency, and it leads to a place where there's no healthy conflict to help kind of drive change. And it leads to just kind of a status quo constantly happening. And then status quo over a long time tends to not be very good for most companies.
Well, if we don't change, that doesn't stop the world from changing. Absolutely right. We used to say, why do leaders have to make decisions? Because the world changes, right? I mean, even if we don't want to change anything. So in my mind, this idea of heat is kind of this scale of, excitement or conflict with a lot of niceness on one end. Now, what if there's too much heat, too much, conflict and difference, and what's the impact of too much heat?
Well, you don't want people to some folks, it can be exhausting energetically. Some folks, physiology just can't handle it. It just exhausts them with their home life, plus, heat in the work life. It just might be too much. So It might have the opposite effect.
The emotional cost of too much heat can be very difficult. I like to tell the joke. I have a conflict now. We're all virtual now. I have a conflict with somebody else in the office. I learned a whole new way to get to the elevator or the bathroom, so I don't have to go near them. It's like people want to avoid that because they're so stressed about it. So that's this problem, or the balance. And so when I think about what the best teams, most resilient teams do, is they have a good heat curve, right? So if it's, and again, I'm not picking on PG&E or whatever, it's PG&E nice means, and I could probably have another sample curve, it means their curve drops off very quickly as soon as there's any heat. And I've been in real life meetings where I've heard somebody say, I kind of feel like I'm personally attacked right now. That means we're way in the red part of the heat curve, right? So the thing that you've described, the not enough heat, too much heat, sort of the Goldilocks effect, is if we have a team that can handle increasing heat, in the beginning, that increasing heat could lead to a breakthrough. You ever been in one of those meetings where we're finally talking about it, or that crazy idea we're really working on, or we're looking at a whole new way, or we're questioning assumptions, we're being creative, we're having that healthy conflict and debate that Jason was talking about, right? That's what we like, and that's that green part of the curve. But then we can get to a part where I go, wait a minute, you're judging me without understanding me. There comes that fairness circle again. There's too much heat, and we can potentially go into breakdown. So the teams that fall apart during extra stress have bad heat curves. They're shallow, they're low, they're to the left. The best teams that can take this heat and actually turn it. That's why I asked you a little bit before, Kalina, are you a little tighter? Are you a little stronger having been through that heat? And you're like, maybe, it's kind of what I heard. Like, I think maybe we are. And so that's what I think the best leaders and teams do, is they can see this dynamic. They can see their heat curve. That's not easy. You got to be able to see it because you're in it. So you got to be able to see it even though you're in it. Then they can actually discuss their team dynamic, their heat curve. When you said that, Jason, I didn't feel like you were really understanding me. Well, Jason, but Michael, you didn't. We can actually discuss what's happening. We can go meta on our culture. We can talk about how we talk. And then finally, we can shift it at will. So we can see this dynamic. We can discuss this dynamic. We can change this dynamic. Those are the most powerful teams. Those teams are essentially unbreakable. Their heat curve kind of just keeps going. Or at least the end where there'll be breakdown, we don't even see it. We didn't even feel it that much because we got each other's back, because we trust each other, because we have that shared meaning, because we have skills and tools and strategies that I work with my clients to develop to essentially shift this curve up and to the right. So that's this idea of the heat curve. So just any questions or comments about this heat curve, and if you're only on the phone, I appreciate you not having the graphic to work with here.
Actually, I was because Stacy wrote a good question in the chat.
That's so fantastic. Oh, okay.
Stacy was about to speak up. Go ahead, Stacy.
Yes, there she goes.
Yeah, Michael, I'm wondering, where I work, I feel like we were really good at building that heat curve when we were more in person, but now with more of our work virtual, I feel like there's some level of vulnerability that people are better at pushing that curve in person, that it's difficult to translate in the virtual setting. I'm not sure how we get better at that.
First of all, I think everybody really appreciates your question. And I would also say something else. The science that I'm starting to see, and I have a number of these studies that I've been looking at, the news isn't good for the work from home and relationships. And a lot of us are digging different parts of it, and some cultures and groups have done it for a long time. But if you're finding, Stacy, that this is harder in certain ways, controlled studies are actually backing that up. And we have not, what do we say? The technical change is easy. The human change curve is long. And so change is about what we call the bold stroke and the long march. And so we've made some bold strokes, but we're still on the long march. So I just kind of want to give a here to your question, that you're unfortunately in very good company. Now, there's a lot of reasons, right? So you might want to think a little bit about why it's harder for you guys specifically. And you gave one theory, I guess, which is, well, there are certain, I'll paraphrase what I heard, and you correct me, there are things we can do in person that allow us to tolerate or hang out on that heat curve without going into breakdown that don't happen or are harder to happen virtually. Is that about right?
Yeah. And I don't know. I have to think some more about it. I'm not sure what it is.
Yes. And I don't want to imagine that I instantly know what it is either, but I will just kind of assuming a certain root cause, that's the smart thing. But there are some best practices that a lot of people I'm working with are using. So one of them is just the idea of when are we virtual? I don't know if you're a hybrid model, Stacy, but the hybrid model is actually the hardest one in certain ways, right? Who's in the office when? Why am I in the office? What access do I get when in the office? So people don't have the big cues that tell them they belong like they used to as much. We don't have the physical presence in the same place. Literally, it's raining for all of us that day. Literally the same 5 options for lunch for all of us. Symbolic things, simple things that take away our ability to not work and yet be together. So, and again, I can hear kind of the other voice saying, oh, if I have another, get to chat and know each other Zoom meeting, I'm going to kill myself, that's what I like. If you ask me for my superpower one more time, I will kill you with my X-ray eyes. I'm so tired of that icebreaker. So, the thing that I think people want to use the most is they say, look, we've got to build relationship other ways. And we can even say to people, I know this is maybe hard, or you're tired, or, you're busy, you have a lot of deliverables, but I think all those deliverables might be a little easier if we got to know each other a little bit more. The other thing is to have explicit ground rules. And I'm not calling anybody out in this call, but I'm always amazed that we're all on Zoom with our cameras off. And so as a leader, I might kind of say, look, I know you might have your camera off, but if it's at all possible, at least for X minutes, let's all get on our cameras. Let's all make a comment. And then the last thing is, Stacy, I'd have you think about how good you guys are at feedback. So is there a feedback loop that allows us to build that resilience, right? That's strong, flexible, and fair. Do we exchange feedback in a way that helps identify things that we're concerned about? So I don't know if those will be helpful, but those are some of the things people are thinking about, I think.
Can I add
other ideas? Absolutely, yeah.
If I may. In my organization, we just started a diversity, equity, and inclusion council about 2 months ago in order to tackle some of the advocacy and policy work that needs to happen systemically. And we're a group of about 20 people. And so I was thinking both of your questions, Stacy, of how do we build or increase our heat curve in a virtual setting? Because we've never met in person in 2 months. And then I think of Jason's question of how do new teams jumpstart that heat curve quickly? Because it's only been 2 months.
I didn't see that. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Oh, no, it's fine. Something that our leader, we have a director who's kind of leading the charge. He spent the first 2 meetings just having us share stories to each other.
Yeah.
Like there was no agenda. It wasn't like, let's jump in and do this thing. We did start off by saying, like, are we at least aligned with why we signed up to be here and why we're here? But after that, he was just like, he would ask a probing question, like, tell me about a time in your life when you ever felt included, and tell that story. And it actually got a lot of people really connected and emotional in a very quick setting. And we did it on Zoom. So it was like cameras on, round table. And so in my experience, which I know is limited, but as much as you can, even in a virtual setting, encourage people to kind of pause the agenda and just tell stories to each other, the more connected I think people will feel, and the more willing I feel to bear the heat with my new teammates.
That's lovely. Yeah. When I said sort of time where we're together but not working, that's a great example of how to do that. I appreciate that a lot. The other way, by the way, that people change their heat curve is, again, to see and discuss it. Let's just notice, when do I feel included? When do I not? How do I feel when we disagree with each other? Am I satisfied with that? How do we all feel about how we work together? That's a lot of courage and leadership. So again, don't make it hard, don't make it unsafe, but have the courage to say, you know, and then I have other clients that say things like, now I'm going to bring a little heat on this one. I have clients that on their team meeting agendas actually have flames on the items where they say, I want heat here, right? So again, the discussing of it, just the idea that, hey, by the way, as a team, we have a little culture here. How do we feel about that team culture in general? And how do we feel about, you know, how we're heard and included and how we make decisions together? And often there is a leader. One of the clients I work with who really uses this, who some of those examples were from them, the flames on the agenda and stuff. The CEO said to his group, you know, we don't have enough debate in our executive meetings. We have a lot of show and tell, and we do a lot of things. But, you know, there's always a meeting before the meeting. And there's often a meeting after the meeting. And if you notice that happening, that's a sign that something's not happening in that other meeting. Now, maybe that's okay. What's the purpose? But most teams, again, it's almost boring, right? I mean, you know, again, this is good heat, right? It's not always sort of conflict. And then, all right, so I'm going to keep going here, keep us on schedule. So I appreciate that. And again, it's two little stories here about two people, and I'm going to keep these kind of brief. So introduce you to Tenny and Scott. Oh, you know, I should, those of you can tell, you can tell his company. I realize I should have changed his shirt. You'd have to really be able to know what that logo is actually before. So pretend that if you see that logo, you'd have to be an old Silicon Valley type to know what that logo is. So when I first met Tenny, she was somebody, wonderful leader, fantastic, very successful in her organization. But she found that she had succeeded mostly by working really hard, being very smart, and being mostly very nice. And she was successful, but with leaving out a lot of details, was in a new, much larger, expanded role, leading other managers who managed other teams and so forth. And she started to realize that she just didn't have enough hours in the day, and that she felt like the reward for more work was just, the reward for her work was just more work getting piled on her. She, at one hand, felt that she wasn't having the influence she needed, while at the same time, her bosses were asking her, please have more influence. You know, so she was in this, and what she didn't know was how to see, discuss, and change her team dynamic. And so she realized that through these more resilient relationships that are strong, flexible, and fair, she can actually start to delegate a lot more. She can get into that virtuous cycle. She can influence more. And a little saying that I know Tenny likes, that I've shared with her, that I think is important in this idea of resilient business relationships is, I'm not against anyone, but I am for myself. So this is the idea of saying, how do I stand up for myself in a way where I don't necessarily have to be against other people? They have their needs, their goals. They work here. You know, they're trying to do their thing. They're my colleagues. So I'm not against their essential interests, but I do know that I have to stand up for myself. That's what creates a heat curve. Kind of to finish that story, she's really very, very successful in that new organization that she's starting. And she got a very exciting opportunity, and she's able to be more in flow and more her full best self as a leader because she understands more about the human dynamic. Now, Scott, these are real people. Scott's in my book. You can figure out who they are if you want it. Scott, I think, is the easiest to understand by his hobby. He was a pugilist, which is a fancy word for a boxer. And that kind of where Tenny got there through nice, Scott got there, frankly, through tough. He was tougher, harder working, more decisive. People would come work for him. They'd last a day or forever. One of those kind of leaders, right? You either couldn't stand it or you would crawl through glass for the guy. And again, without getting into details, this guy was a global technical leader, well known, and had, again, been the smartest, toughest guy in the room. And he was having trouble, again, in a new, more senior role. He was working with a bunch of peers that didn't work for him, that he couldn't make the final decision. And he felt that they wouldn't always, he could influence them the way he wanted them to be influenced. His arguments didn't land. I remembered he was getting ready for a big meeting that I was helping him prepare for. And I said, well, what's your strategy for the meeting? He said, I'm going to think of every possible argument they could come up with and have a counter argument in advance. And that way I'll be bulletproof. Right? So you could see that was, in the end, not going to be very effective at that point. He was able to start to see how he can be collaborative. He can use agreements to lead. He can take conflict and turn it into a transformational opportunity as a leader, where he becomes better, the people around him become better, and every conflict after that gets easier and easier to resolve. And so these are examples of people that have had that kind of journey that I think teams and leaders need to go on now. And so I think actually we cover this, and I don't intend to cover everything equally. You may have seen this quote, first you build relationships, then you build a business. And I think we've kind of talked about a lot of these already. Social resilience impacts the P&L. Certainly it impacts net promoter score, customer sat. That's what I think everybody wants, is that resilient customer relationship. When the budget gets cut and they fire everybody but you, then you know you've got a good, resilient relationship with that client. As we also all know, depending on who you ask, 50 to 90% of change efforts fail to achieve their original intended outcome. Kind of a famous consultants have been sharing this little statistic for a very long time. However, again, it's the people side of the business, right? So we look at the mountain of the physical or technology change. We think that's the hill we're going to climb. Next to that mountain is a huge mountain called the people adoption effort. And so if we're going to have adoption, influence is the currency of change. If you give people influence, you buy their accountability for the ultimate change. So that's strong, flexible, and fair. That's going to require a good heat curve. Some other people have already mentioned the impacts on engagement, employee, and DEI. So just going to kind of close. Oh, yeah, I did want to share this quickly. This is the idea of, so people have talked about trust. And certainly there's no question that with resilient relationships, there's a sense of trust. And so the idea of this formula is a way of assessing and building trust. So I'll just define it real quick. We could talk more about it during the Q&A if people have more questions about it. So T is the trust level. How much trust do you have? Trust is a function of intention times consistency over risk. So intention means, whose interest do I intend to satisfy? So there are many definitions of trust. The definition I like is trust is the belief. So it's a belief. It's not sort of a fact. It's a belief. Trust is the belief that it's safe to give power over my interests to someone else. It's safe for me to give someone else power over things that I care about. You trust the babysitter by giving them power over your children. Right? You trust. And then why do you do that? Because you know their intention. It's because they've been consistent. So consistent means I do what I say. It means I keep my promises. I'm technically competent. I say I don't know and I don't know. All of that is in that numerator. And you could be very consistent, but if your intention is only for yourself, and you get the other idea, I can have great intentions, but if I can't keep my promises. So So that's what's on top of that. But however, what I found is that the risk is matched to the level of trust. So if I'm going to have you wash my car, that's a certain amount of trust. I guess you could hurt my car. But if I'm going to have you take care of my kids while my wife and I get on a plane and take a vacation, that's a whole nother level of risk. So I and C are going to have to be higher numbers than the other number. All right. So that's a little more about trust. I'm going to skip this one altogether, a conflict one. And then there was a question before about how do you get a good heat curve going? Or I might say also, how does one intervene to create a better heat curve? And again, this is at the strategy level. So there are tools and techniques inside each one of these. But what I'm suggesting, again, another framework, but hopefully helpful because it allows us to diagnose a situation where we are in breakdown, where we don't have the heat curve, where we don't have social resilience, where we're turning on each other. And the story I'll use to tell this very quickly is of the hotel union. Somebody mentioned, you know, it's fun. We got two different unions. Everybody's got to get together. I think that was Jason who mentioned that. By the way, you're talking to a former IATSE local union member. I used to be an IATSE.
Well, I'm equity, so we're battling.
That's it. That's true. Oh, then you know, I'll kick you out of the webinar. Okay, so if you're from the Bay Area, which I think most of us are, and if you've been around here a little while, you know about a lot of the problems with the hotel unions. They love to go on strike. HERE, Local 5, I think it is. Unite Here, actually, Local 5 is their current name, but back in the day, they were a different name. And they'll beat on the pots and pans at the front door of the Hyatt so the guests can't sleep, and they'll stand in front of the delivery truck so they can't get the linens. And, you know, it's a lot of conflict. And one year, years ago, me and my firm were hired to help them avoid essentially this problem. And so they were on a vicious cycle, the top words. They didn't know each other. The managers and the employees really didn't know each other at all. So all that talking a little while ago, Kalinga, about connection and emotion and getting to know each other, they were very ignorant of each other. And I use the word ignorant just meaning uninformed or misinformed. And so because of that ignorance, the employees of the managers and the managers of the employees, there was a lot of fear. Well, when there's fear, how do I react? I have two choices. I can protect or I can attack. And so they would do a lot of this protect and attack behavior between each other. This would lead them into breakdown. The breakdown would reinforce the ignorance, and around we go until we end up on the street banging pots and pans. And the convention bookers go, screw San Francisco, we'll go to Atlanta. And everybody loses. So no win-win, no win-lose, just lose. Okay? So what we did is we tried to get them on the more virtuous cycle. One of the guys who was a houseman, he cleaned the room. He was a former airline engineer in Vietnam, came to stop the communists, couldn't get a better job at that moment. And the manager had no clue the guy he was talking to. The employee thought, oh, this manager's got a great life. Well, this guy is a low-level manager. He works 12-hour days. He's had to move him and his family 6 times to try to move up in the hotel business. He doesn't have it perfect either. They were ignorant of each other. So we created knowledge. It's pretty hard to fight with somebody that I realize is another human being. And again, that's a little bit of the Kalinga story, I think. Let's connect as human beings. So then we started, again, remember that trust formula. So you start with a little risk, so you don't have to have a ton of trust. And then over time, you take bigger and bigger risks. So we started to get them to take risks together. From that, they started to build breakthroughs rather than breakdowns. We got them more on that virtuous cycle. So again, this is the idea that says, what's happening in your situation? Where are you? And then which one of these strategies might get you there. So we've got about 15 minutes, I think, on the time here. If everybody can wants to continue to stay, that's right, Kalinga. We have 15 minutes.
Yeah, technically this time was for closing out and networking, but
well, it's, just those chicken here. So we can certainly close out and network, or we can ask questions, whatever you guys want to, whatever serves.
Yeah, I was going to say for the group, for those of you, if you have to drop off right now, just know this is being recorded. So we're going to share in case you're like, I don't want to miss a single slide. That's perfectly fine. Mike.
Actually, let me interrupt you 1 second. If they're jumping off, either Kalinga, if you can make sure I get their emails or you put your email in chat, I have a special discount of a Udemy course about all of this, a bunch of 4 to 7 minute class, little videos. And I'm going to give everybody a special coupon for that. So just for attending our workshop. So if you are dropping off, make sure that we can send you that little follow-up.
Jessica's raising her hand.
Yeah. Michael, would you send me whatever you want them to get? Because I will send out a follow-up to everyone with the links to the video, the slides, which you're going to give to Kalinga.
Correct. Thank you so much.
And whatever else, just send it directly to me. When I have it all in a packet, it will go out probably in a few days, depends on the video editing needs.
That's so awesome. Yeah. And anybody registered.
We do that for you.
Anybody registered, of course, not just people who
I assume you have my email still, and I'm admin. That's my email.
Okay.
Well, and to be clear, I didn't mean to kind of cut the presentation. I just wanted to kind of pause for the people who needed to go. I do see Paul's hand is up as well.
So I just want to make a quick information, unbeknownst to your being here, Michael, and that our TED Circle in 2 weeks is on optimism. And it's the TED Talk called The Optimism Bias. So it's free. If people want to sign up, but it completely, I think, dovetails in ways to some of the things we say. What are the pros and cons of optimism and a whole bunch of things. And it's a discussion time on that very topic. So I wish we could say we were smart enough to plan it this way, but it's totally serendipitous.
You got to learn from a rock band. When they play a song they've never heard before and they end it completely wrong, they immediately announce, just as we practiced it. And by the way, the topic, I think is there's another phrase called toxic positivity. Then there's practical optimism. And again, as you say, there are advantages and disadvantages, and they all impact the heat curve. They all impact the resiliency. Yeah. Other thoughts or comments or
Well, before we get into that, Michael, I recognize in my quest to give people who needed to leave and out, I cut you off. And so what I would like is if you could close out. I see the slide here, if you don't mind.
Yeah, this is my I think that's my last little slide. Yeah. So, so I do offer to anybody who comes to a webinar and for ATD folks, and I should put this link in the chat myself, I realize, because you can't. So anyway, thank you. There's some of the things I do. But if you want to talk more, what would happen is you would get on my, and maybe I'll just send this to Jessica along with the rest. Maybe that's the best method. And so you can book time on my calendar, and I offer a free 30-minute consultation, no cost consultation. And if you register and book that meeting with me, I'll send you an assessment tool, which can be used to actually assess the strong, flexible, fair attributes of any team or business relationship. And so that actually gives you a report. For example, if it's strong but not fair or flexible, we call that coercive. If it's fair and flexible but not strong, it's superficial, etc. And so this will give you some indicators. The most powerful is if you have everybody on your team or everybody in that relationship fill out the same survey and compare the results. This is a wonderful way to see, discuss, and change your dynamic. So that's what that tool's about. And again, that would be accessible. So thank you. That thus ends my presentation to the court.
All right. Now, if everyone could give Michael an American Sign Language clap. If you wave your hands, that is American Sign Language.
Is this sign language for thank you?
I think this is. but I appreciate the sentiment. And I just want to say thank you, Michael, for your time. And thank all of you for joining us today. I, too, had a little bit of a wrap-up presentation for those who would like to hear it. Estimated time, about 2 minutes. I'll be quick. I want to acknowledge that it is, what day is it? Is it Thursday?
Thursday.
Yeah, it's been that kind of a week for me, folks. Just a heads up, if you like this event today, if you are interested in being a part of it or getting exposure to more, don't mind my quote from Audre Lorde, wanted to tell you about joining the chapter. So if you are currently not a member, you will have from today 7 days in which you could join as a member, and you will get $20 off of your annual fee. As you can see, being a member allows you to volunteer, just like myself and Jessica and Paul. It also allows you to network. So if you want to continue to meet more people in the Bay who do this work, who are interested in topics related to talent development, learning and development, people development, consider joining the chapter. Also, if you are a member of ATD National, so let's say you've been a member of ATD National, you get extra perks. You are a golden member if you join, did I say that right?
Power member.
Power member. Thank you, Jessica. If you join the chapter as well, which includes a lot of different resources from both ATD National as well as the local chapter. And as a chapter member, you can help contribute to the local Bay by using a product code. It's here, number 8003, when you purchase products from National ATD. Upcoming events. Paul talked about the TED Circle, which is a free event. It's free for all, and it is just a place to share thoughts and to have great discussion about thought-provoking topics. But here's some other events we have. We have the Instructional Design Workshop by Chris Schaefer, highly recommended. She's done it for many years, and that is a 3-day commitment. We also have a holistic learning design special interest group on October 19th. And we have a 3D learning special interest group on November 8th. So that is just a handful of the events that we have coming, but we're always looking for more. And also, I'm going to go ahead and put this link in the chat, but if you could give us your feedback about how today's event went, we would really appreciate it.